Questions without notice. We'll move to questions, and I give the call to the Honourable the Deputy, the Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Moments before question time, The Australian and the Bunbury Herald reported that Professor Marsha Langton, a member of the referendum working group appointed by the minister, has accused no voters of opposing the referendum because of, quote, base racism or sheer stupidity, unquote. Will the Minister for Indigenous Australians condemn Professor Langton's comments?
Order. Members on my left and the Minister for the Environment will cease interjecting so I can hear from the Leader of the House on a point of order. 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 Members on my left.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. On page 554 of practice, there's a prevention or a ruling out of questions that ask for ministers to comment on, and I quote, statements by people outside the House.
I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, Professor Marsha Langton is a member of the referendum working group appointed by the Minister for Indigenous Australians. A minister can be questioned about the following matters for which he or she is responsible or officially connected: public affairs or administration. This appointment is the minister's appointment.
Order. I'll deal with this matter. The practice says statements by people outside the House, including other members, notably opposition members and senators. I'll allow the question, and I'll just ask the minister to make sure she's being relevant, and I'll give her the call.
Can I thank the member for her question? I want to say this very clearly. I call on everyone involved in this referendum to act respectfully and with care for their fellow Australians. We are a great country.
Order.
We are enhanced by listening to a diversity of views and opinions. And fundamentally, the Voice is all about the act of listening. Listening to some of the most disadvantaged Australians, First Nations people, listening to remote communities so we can help close the gap and improve lives, because we know that listening leads to better results. Of course, there is no room for racism of any kind in this country. We are a diverse country, and that diversity is one of our greatest strengths. Whether your family arrived here 60,000 years ago, 6 years ago, we are all part of this country's story. I encourage all Australians to vote yes on October the 14th, because it is time to listen, it is time for recognition.
Give the call to the member for Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. What difference will the Housing Australia Future Fund make to Australians needing a safe and affordable place to call home, and how has it been received?
Call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Robertson for that question. He understands how important the Housing Australia Future Fund will be, as do many members in this place, members on this side and members of the crossbench over there. And can I say it is important because it will actually provide a pipeline of funding to help build social and affordable housing right across this country. The fact that it was there not just for a few years but there in perpetuity is important to provide confidence to the sector and, importantly, confidence for Australians who need homes the most. This will change housing in Australia. It will change the lives of people who are waiting for social and affordable housing in this country, not just for now but for generations. We've heard from the sector about the difference this will make on the ground. The master builders have said, and I quote, "The Housing Australia Future Fund legislation is a vital piece of the housing puzzle by encouraging investment in social and community housing sector." Kate Colvin from Homelessness Australia, who said, and I quote, "The homes delivered through the Housing Australia Future Fund will each make an enormous difference to the people who would otherwise be homeless. Her comments were echoed by Emma Greenhill, the CEO of National Shelter, who said, "The passage of these laws is critically important." Mr Speaker, I want to take this opportunity again to thank all in the sector, whether it be the community housing sector, the homelessness service sector or the building and construction sector, because they understand how important this bill and our broader housing agenda is to the Parliament and to the people of Australia. We know how hard they work, day in, day out, whether it be on the front line or whether it be getting up the homes for Australians that need them most.
Deakin will cease interjecting.
Mr Speaker, this fund is part of our broad housing agenda, whether it be our social housing accelerator, the $2 billion, whether it be the Housing Australia Future Fund or the Housing Accord, whether it be our build-to-rent changes, our Commonwealth Rent Assistant changes, the additional funding for financing for more social and affordable homes. We have investments right across the housing spectrum, from homelessness services to public and social housing to rental housing, right up to improving home ownership. Right across the housing spectrum, we are investing for Australians that need it most. But the Housing Australia Future Fund passing the Parliament is critically important because it's important for those people that need it most. It's important for older women at risk of homelessness, important for women and children fleeing family and domestic violence, important for the veterans who need housing, who need a safe space to stay at night. This legislation will change lives for thousands of Australians. I look forward to its passage and continuing to work for Australians so that more Australians have a safe, affordable place to call home.
Give the call to the honourable member for Capricornia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Can the Minister confirm whether members of The Voice would be elected or appointed, and how would the government's objective of gender parity be achieved?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Can I thank the member for her question? And I thank the member because it relates to the constitutional recognition and the Uluru Statement from the Heart. It is very clear, and if people had taken the time to look at the principles that outline what The Voice will be about, one of them is gender parity. It is gender parity which is very important and has been a very consistent theme, as Julian Lesser would be able to tell you in the inquiry that he and Patrick Dodson undertook. The important thing about The Voice is this. It is absolutely about listening. It is about the establishment of an advisory committee that will provide advice to this Parliament. And it is also going to be made up of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And as the principles say, it will represent local communities. It will be chosen by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and it is very clear in those principles.
The call to the member for Blair.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How will the Housing Australia Future Fund help ease the housing shortage and strengthen the economy after a decade of neglect?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I appreciate the question from the member for Blair. There's no harder working local member than the member for Blair, representing the suburbs of Ipswich and the communities surrounding. Mr Speaker, the member for Blair is part of a government that takes the big issues in our economy and our society seriously. And there is no bigger challenge than the inflation challenge in our economy, and housing is a big part of that, and that's why it is so important that the Housing Australia Future Fund will pass this Parliament. Inflation is moderating in our economy, but it is still too high, and that's why our highest priority as a government is to take some of the edge off the inflationary pressures in our economy without making those pressures worse. And that's why we are rolling out billions of dollars of relief for Australians right around the country. energy bill relief, increased in government payments, dealing with some of the out-of-pocket health costs that people confront, getting wages moving again, making it easier to work more and earn more by making early childhood education
Member for Casey
cheaper.
will cease interjecting.
But a big part of our plan to combat the inflationary pressures that people are confronting is to build more houses in our economy and in our local communities as well. And our agenda for housing is a broad and ambitious agenda. The Housing Australia Future Fund is an important part of that, but it's not the only part of that, as the Minister for Housing ran through a moment ago, whether it's Housing Australia Future Fund, the Social Housing Accelerator, all of the different ways that we are pouring literally billions of dollars into building more homes so that we have more supply, and we can start to make up for the fact that the wasted decade left us too far behind when it came to the building of social and affordable housing in our economy.
Order.
So the first part is to build more housing and get more supply so that we can address this long-standing challenge in our economy. But at the same time as we're doing that, Mr Speaker, we're also making sure that we can take some of the edge off these high rents that people are paying for rental properties around the country. And that's why we are proud to be rolling out the biggest increase in Commonwealth rent assistance for 3 decades, Mr Speaker. This housing challenge has been ignored in our economy for too long, and Australians, and particularly Australian renters, are paying the price for the wasted decade of missed opportunities that those opposite presided over. Our job, and we embrace this enthusiastically, Mr Speaker, is to work for Australia to continue to build new homes in our economy, in our communities, and we'll keep doing that despite the negative and nasty and angry politics played by those opposite.
Order. Before I call the member for Wentworth, I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today are a delegation representing iProud, an Indigenous police recruiting program run by TAFE New South Wales. I'm also pleased to inform the House that present in the special visitors gallery today is Alan Pidgeon AM, the chair of the Australian National Flag Association. Welcome to Question Time, and I encourage all members to visit the Great Hall tomorrow to see the Parliament House flag up close and to meet a descendant of the original designer. Give the call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is to the Minister for Government Services. Constituents from Wentworth and across the country are becoming increasingly frustrated at the wait times, calls not being answered, hang-ups and inaccessibility of Services Australia. In some cases, the agency's failure to provide support promised by law has pushed people into extreme financial hardship. Will you make a commitment to the House to urgently improve the agency's performance before the end of the year with a published plan and clear goals and reporting metrics?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme and the Minister for Government Services.
I thank the member for Wentworth for raising an important issue. And I'd just like to acknowledge the inconvenience and the frustration caused to Australians, not only in your electorate but across Australia, by delays in telephony in Services Australia. In answering your question fully, I'd like to explain why I think some of this is happening. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what Services Australia are doing and some of the improvements that we've made. First of all, demand is up. There's no question about that. Between the last financial year and the year before, the number of people seeking childcare subsidy increased 36%. The number of Commonwealth seniors seeking a health card increased 85%.
Member for Moncrief.
And indeed, after the COVID debts, which were paused, they were then unpaused. And also, with the more generous treatment under this government of our paid parental leave and childcare subsidy, that's led to more benefits.
Leader of the Nationals.
But also it is true that not just on the demand side, but between 2017 and 2020, the number of people working in Services Australia was reduced by the then government by 3,500 people, and they commissioned IT projects which have significantly failed. But let's have a thought for the people working at Services Australia. Let's think about the people who actually work on the front line here. Yesterday they answered 227,000 phone calls. Last year they answered 55 million phone calls. There's 5,000 people today working on answering phones. There's 6,500 people working in the service centres, Last year they saw 10 million people. There's 3,000 people processing payments. Right now, every day, there's 270 people just processing parental leave claims. There's 1.1 billion online transactions with Services Australia last year, and there's 500 million customer interactions. Last year, Services Australia paid out $1.4 billion promptly to 1.2 million people who suffered natural disasters. And also, I just remind people here that Services Australia staff experienced 9,000 abusive incidents, of which 1,200 were most serious. What we've been doing is we've had the Robodebt Royal Commission rebuilding the culture of Services Australia.
Order. The Minister will pause. The member for Wentworth on the point of order.
Yeah. On relevance, I'm asking about the performance, how the performance can improve of Services Australia.
I haven't ruled, Minister. The question was about commitments to improve performances with clear plans and published goals. I'm just going to ask the Minister, he's got another 24 seconds. He has been relevant to the topic, which he is in with the standing orders, but just bring him back to the question.
One can't understand the improvements until you understand what the problem is and what's actually happening. We've had the Robodebt Royal Commission. In the last budget, we've put 850 extra staff on to help natural disasters. We've commissioned the MyGov audit, and we've now created an app to encourage people to go online, which has seen 3 million uploads of the app. Interestingly, though, when we came to government, there were 1,819 separate virtual queues under the old government. Now we've reduced that to 700.
Order. The call to the honourable member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How will the Housing Australia Future Fund build a better future for Australians, and is there any opposition to the bill?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Canberra for her question. I am pleased that there is now a majority in the Senate for the Housing Australia Future Fund. This is an important policy that I announced as part of a budget reply and that we took to the election and we have an endorsement for. It's a policy that will see 30,000 social and affordable homes built for women and children, including 4,000 of them for women and children fleeing domestic violence. It will see homes built for frontline workers, for veterans. It will fix up housing in remote and regional communities. This is the single biggest investment in housing in more than a decade, and it ensures that more Australians have a safe and affordable place to call home. We're working for Australia and we're delivering on our commitments each and every day. And I thank the crossbench in both the House of Representatives and the Senate for their support. But those opposite, of course, continue to say no. They continue to say no to this, like they say no to absolutely everything. And they think that investment they've borrowed some rhetoric from some others in this place. They've borrowed some rhetoric now from one of the crossbench parties, those opposite, in saying that it's all about a punt. I don't know what they think the Future Fund is, Mr Speaker. I don't know what they think the Future Fund is. Chaired by their mate Peter Costello, but maybe he can explain it to them if they give him a call. Now, their only policy, of course, is to let people raid their own super to buy a home, even though we know that is stealing from tomorrow to make the problem worse today. Now, the opposition are determined to say no to everything. If we waited around for them, 6 million Australians would still be waiting for cheaper medicine. 5 million households would still be waiting for energy bill relief. 1 million families would still be waiting for cheaper childcare. They are the blockers, we are the builders. And I refer them to the statement of Robert Menzies. When the Liberal Party was formed way back in 1944, he said this: "On far too many questions we have found our role to be simply that of the man who says no." Remind you of anyone?
Order.
And then he went on to say, "There is no room in Australia for a party of reaction. There is no useful place for a policy of negation.
The member
Those
for Groom.
opposites say no to absolutely everything. Doesn't matter whether there's a mandate, doesn't matter how broad the support for a policy, it's just no, 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 just the one sound coming out of this Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. The Minister for Education today said it was rubbish and a lie that some of the people who helped design The Voice are seeking reparations through treaty. But Voice architect Professor Megan Davis has written, quotes, "Treaties are about reparations for past injustices. How can these things be excluded? A voice to Parliament is the first step and treaty-making follows." Minister, who is right? The Minister for Education or one of your members of the First Nations Referendum Working Group?
Give the call to the Minister for Indigenous Australians.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the member for his question. The voice to Parliament, this referendum is not about reparations. We have made that point on a number of occasions. It is about entrenching a voice, enshrining a voice in the Australian Constitution. It is about listening. It is about making sure that we collectively as a parliament get advice directly from First Nations people, and it will result in better outcomes. That is what the referendum is about. All of the things that you raise and others have raised is just an attempt to play politics. This is above politics. This is about making sure that our founding document, the big law book of this country, reflects the truth about something that we should be all proud of. We live in a nation that is older than any other. We live in a nation where we should be proud of the human history of this country. And I make this point very clearly. The voice will be about things that affect First Nations people: health, education, jobs and housing. And I also make this point, which seems to be miraculously forgotten by those that advocate no. The third part of the proposed constitutional amendment is extremely clear about our collective role in this place in relation to the referendum. It says, "The Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including," and I say this very clearly to those of you that are taking notice, the voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. Now, how that is forgotten is just beyond me. All you have to do is read the question and then read the three parts to the amendment, and you will realise what our responsibilities are.
The call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. How is the Albanese Labor government protecting the Murray-Darling River system, and why is it important that all members of Parliament support these efforts?
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition knows my policy when it comes to interjecting as ministers are approaching the dispatch box. I want to hear from the Minister for the Environment and Water in silence. She has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Boothby for her question. She, like most South Australian MPs in particular, knows how important it is to fully deliver the Murray-Darling Basin Plan as it was promised, as it was designed. I introduced legislation last week to do just that, and if you ever need a reminder of why this is necessary, You can go back to the Prime Minister during the Millennium Drought, who said, and I quote, "The old way of managing the Murray-Darling Basin has reached its use-by date. In a protracted drought with the prospect of long-term climate change, we need radical and permanent change." Well, that dangerous radical born and bred in the inner west of Sydney was John Howard, of course. And, Mr Speaker, he spoke a great deal of sense that day, and we've seen another outbreak of good sense today from the member for Sturt, and I thank him for this, who told the Australian newspaper that we should be delivering the 450 gigalitres of environmental water, including through voluntary water purchase. And also from Senator McLaughlin, the Liberal senator for South Australia, who said, and I quote, "It is imperative that we prioritise the welfare of the natural world by securing this water." I want to thank both of those members for their contribution, because protecting this river system should be a priority for all political parties. In fact, this legislation has something for everyone. The Liberals and the Nationals have said that they want longer for the water-saving infrastructure to be delivered, as did the National
The Leader of the
Farmers
Nationals will cease
Federation.
interjecting.
That's what my legislation delivers. The Greens political party should know that delivering the 450 gigalitres of additional environmental water is absolutely critical as well, because this is 1 million square kilometres of inland Australia, 16 Ramsar wetlands, 35 endangered species and 120 different water birds. As I'd have to say,
the Leader of the Nationals will cease
Mayo
interjecting.
and members of the crossbench have pointed out how important it is to deliver the full Murray-Darling Basin plan. Mr Speaker,
Order. The member for
Labor's
Riverina.
proposal is sensitive, it's sensible, it's balanced, and I was so pleased to see this outbreak of common sense today from members of the Liberal Party. I trust that members of all political parties will live up to what they have said they support in the past.
Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. I refer to the Minister's previous answer. Minister, can the Parliament really override the provisions of the Constitution?
Order. Order. The Minister will— Order. There is far too much noise. Order. I want to hear— The Attorney-General will cease interjecting, as will the member for Deakin and the Deputy Leader. Anyone else down there as well can zip it. The Leader of the House.
In the ordinary course— sorry, point of order, Mr Speaker. In the ordinary course, something about the Constitution would be directed to the Attorney-General, and it also would be out of order if it were a legal opinion, and I'm not sure what else this question could be considered as.
The way that it's stated is possible seeking legal opinion, but I just want to hear from the— Order. I want to hear from the manager.
It's well accepted, Mr Speaker, in this parliament. It's well accepted in this parliament that questions can be asked seeking clarification of what has been said by, in this case, the minister, in an previous answer, in this case, the answer she's just given.
That's different to what the leader did ask, but I'm just going to just going to allow the question just to rephrase it, so make sure it is following what the manager just advised. I'm going to give him the call.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Indigenous Australians. I refer to the minister's previous answer. Can the minister confirm her advice in her previous answer that the Parliament can override the provisions of the Constitution?
I'll allow the question. And order. The Minister for Environment will cease giving comment each time a minister approaches the dispatch box. The Minister for Indigenous Australians has the call.
I beg your pardon. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. which relates to the constitutional recognition and the Uluru Statement from the Heart. My previous answer went to what the amendments are to the Constitution, and they are very clear. Firstly, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. Secondly, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And finally, the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, listen to what I've got to say, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including composition, functions, powers and procedures. Extraordinarily clear, and you have a role to play, and I will ask the Attorney-General, who this should have been addressed to conclude the answer.
Order. Order. Members on my left. Order. The Manager of Opposition Business. The Attorney-General has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm more than happy to add to the answer that has been given very competently by the Minister for Indigenous Australians. This question from the Leader of the Opposition shows entirely, on full display, his role as the leader of the misinformation and disinformation campaign that is symptomatic of the No campaign. He knows that the constitutional provision is extremely clear. He knows that the legal nonsense that he has repeated for month after month has been dismissed by the former Chief Justice of the High Court of Australia, Robert French, by the leading constitutional lawyer, Brett Walker, who said of that sort of question that it was too silly for words. And that is what we have heard repeatedly from this Leader of the Opposition, who will stop at nothing in his campaign of disinformation and misinformation. What have you got to say for yourself?
The Attorney-General will resume his seat. The Attorney-General will resume. Has the Attorney-General concluded his answer? Has the Attorney-General concluded his answer? Well, order. Thought so. I'll hear from the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
On a point of order.
On the point of order, and the point of order is relevance, Mr Speaker. The contempt that this government shows for millions of Australians—
Resume your seat. The order. Just going to ask the House to resume order. The Attorney-General has 25 seconds remaining on his statement and asked to the question. And the Attorney-General has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I was saying, this Leader of the Opposition is the leader of a misinformation and disinformation campaign. He knows it. He has misled the people of Australia repeatedly throughout this campaign, and he should be ashamed of himself.
Order. The member for Fairfax and the member for Riverina and the member for Gippsland, the trio, shall cease interjecting. I want to hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I'm rising to seek a withdrawal from the Leader of the Opposition. During that answer, I've had the chance to go to the live minutes of the answer that had been given by the Minister for Indigenous Australians. Now, I'm raising a point of order.
Order.
I'm raising a point of order. I'm seeking a withdrawal.
Order. Is it a question to me, or is
no? I'm raising a point of order to seek a withdrawal for disorderly conduct and for unparliamentary language.
Yeah. Order. The order. Everyone will cease interjecting. The Leader of the House is not asking me a question. He would do that at the end of question time. He is asking for a statement to be withdrawn, and I want to hear what he has to say, because I couldn't hear what was happening. So I'm He's got the minutes. I just want to hear what he's saying.
Thank you. The statement that I'm asking to have withdrawn is the claim in the previous question from the Leader of the Opposition that the Minister for Indigenous Australians had said that the parliament can override the provisions of the Constitution. I've gone through the live minutes. That was not said. To completely misrepresent in this House a member immediately in that way, when you know it is not true, you know you've said something that's not—
Order. Order. Members on my— the member for Groom will leave the chamber under 94A. You're on a warning. All right. I want to hear from the manager.
Mr Speaker, that was very clearly an abuse of the standing orders by the Leader of the House. There was no point of order, and if he wants to ask you a question after question time, he's entitled to do that, but he's certainly not entitled to do what he just did.
He's seeking for order. He's seeking a statement to be withdrawn. I'll hear from him again.
Mr Speaker, this is misinformation on live TV. Everybody saw it.
Order.
He knows it wasn't true. He should withdraw it. He should withdraw it. He knows it wasn't true.
Order.
And he knew it when he
Resume your
said
seat.
it.
I'll deal with the matter. All right. The Leader of the Opposition wants the call.
Well, Mr Speaker,
on the point of order.
To the point of order, it's very clear that this was an abuse of the standing orders. It was an opportunity. But, Mr Speaker, you asked the people at the dispatch box to be heard in quiet.
Order. Members on my right.
Stop the confected outrage, for goodness sake.
Members
it's unbecoming
on my right
even for
will
you.
cease ejecting. The Minister for the Environment will cease ejecting, so will the Minister for Infrastructure.
Mr Speaker, I have watched this Leader of the House with confected outrage on many occasions. Hard to imagine a more egregious example of it than today, Mr Speaker.
All right.
The proper process to be followed here, if there is any substance to what the Minister is putting to you, is that it be dealt with by way of question to you as Speaker at the end of question time. That is consistent, Mr Speaker, with your ruling to us last week.
Order. Resume your seat. Order. Just want to be clear for everyone what the process is. There are questions to the Speaker around the administration of the House. The time to do that is the end of question time. This was not about the administration of the House. The Leader of the House is seeking a withdrawal on a statement that the Leader of the Opposition made regarding a question. The member for Solomon and the member for Wills are now warned. This is not a laughing matter. The question did contain a statement. I'm not sure of whether that statement was accurate or not, but the Leader of the House has indicated that the minutes indicate that it's a different statement. But if I'm to adjudicate on every question or every statement that is made regarding whether it's accurate or not, I'm not in a place to do that. But I just want to be clear. If people are asking questions, they're entitled to do so. I just ask them to be accurate and make sure they are not misleading any other statement that the members made. We're just going to move to the next question. Give the call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering a fairer citizenship system for Australian residents from New Zealand? What will this mean for long-term residents who have been building their lives in the Australian community?
Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Macarthur for raising a very important question. As he well knows, Australia is a country that is built on citizenship. Citizenship is the common bond for all Australians, whether we are Australian by birth or by choice, and it's something that lies at the heart of a unified, cohesive and inclusive nation. And we recognise in the Albanese government that there are many New Zealanders here on special category visas who've been stuck without a clear pathway to citizenship despite their contributions, despite very significant contributions, raising families, working, paying taxes and building lives in this country. And that is why, on the 1st of July, we opened the direct pathway to Australian citizenship for New Zealand citizens living in Australia. And all special category visa holders are now able to apply directly for citizenship as long as they meet the residency and other standard requirements. And I was so delighted, Speaker, to be with my friend, the member for Lalor, on Saturday, to welcome the first couple to become Australian citizens under the new pathway. And I'd like to share a little of their story. Mr and Mrs Kingy, Rio and Teresa have lived in Australia since 2007, having come here to work and to find new opportunities. And since then, as small business owners, for the past 13 years, they have contributed to the local community, paid taxes and also employed Australians for more than a decade. But despite this great contribution, until now, they haven't really been able to call Australia home. And as Mrs Kingy said to me on Saturday, it's actually a real privilege to become Australian citizens after so long. For our family and our friends, we just wanted to set the example and put it out there that it's not so hard anymore. What a beautiful and affirming message. And it doesn't end there, Speaker, because yesterday a citizenship ceremony was held right here in Parliament House to mark Citizenship Day later this week. A further 13 New Zealanders acquired Australian citizenship at the ceremony, including Eli and Catherine, two Kiwis who came to Australia for a better life for them and their families. For Catherine, the pathway means she'll finally be able to fully be part of the Australian community after moving here for love. And for Eli, who moved here almost 20 years ago for his son's rugby league career, it provides him with the certainty that he'll be able to stay here and watch his grandchildren grow up. Now, Speaker, it's only fair that our closest friends and allies are able to be full members of our community. And in the coming months, we will be seeing more and more Kiwi families celebrating. I'm pleased that nearly 3,500 New Zealanders have already passed the citizenship test. And of course, all of this is possible because of the work that we have done on citizenship processing, with wait times decreasing more than 50% since we came to government. And this landmark pathway is changing lives for the better. It serves to further strengthen the bond between Australia and New Zealand, and of course our local communities too.
Concluded. The call to the member for Herbert.
My question is to the Prime Minister. In an interview with Neil Mitchell 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister confessed he had not read the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. The Prime Minister said, "Why would I?" Has the Prime Minister now read the statement from the Heart in full? And does the Prime Minister accept his failure to read the statement in full has contributed to his failure to convince Australians to vote yes in the referendum?
Order. There's far too much noise on my left, and ministers are continually interjecting during questions. It will not continue. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have read the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. It's on the wall in my office, and here it is. And here it is. And here it is.
Order.
And the nonsense opposite, Mr Speaker.
Order. The member
we
for
just
Petrie.
saw an example where the Leader of the Opposition stood at this dispatch box and attempted to verbal the Minister for Indigenous Affairs by putting words in her mouth that she did not say. It's called Hansard, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition seems to be unaware of it. And on page 1 of the Herald and the Age today reported the No Campaign strategy, a deliberate strategy of promoting fear over fact. No callers urged to use fear over fact. And that is what we are seeing. That is what we are seeing. The No Campaigners out there saying this: when reason and emotion collide, emotion always wins, is one of the quotes that are there.
The member for Page.
They are very consciously over there with the Advance campaign. The Advance campaign out there, made up of former Liberal Party people and some others from some very strange groups. But there are people who have backgrounds on this in the Liberal Party, a former Chief of Staff, indeed, to a Liberal Prime Minister, Chris Kenny, who's made a very clear statement. He says this about the nonsense about the Uluru Statement. He says this: the claim is false. The documents they refer to are background papers and meeting summaries from consultations leading up to Uluru. They have been public all along, including 5 years of the coalition government, and no one has signed up to them.
Order.
The longest statement claim is a confection aimed at sustaining a scare campaign, but incredibly some persist with it. That is what Chris Kenny has had to say about this nonsense. But there they are, telling their campaigners to promote fear rather than hope, to promote division rather than unity, to promote the entrenching of failures rather than the better future, to promote ignoring rather than listening, to promote exclusion rather than recognition. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is a gracious statement of around 440 words. But the constitutional recognition referendum question is very clear as well. Recognition, and then there shall be a voice, then it may make representations on matters affecting Indigenous people.
Order.
And the third is the primacy of the Parliament.
Concluded. Before I order the member for New England, we'll cease interjecting just before I call the member for Hunter. A few more announcements. I'm pleased to advise in the gallery today there are recipients from the Chief Opposition Whip's electorate who are winners of the Teaching Awards of the School Plus Commonwealth Bank. And I'd like to recognise 12-month teaching fellowship Sarah Curtis from Marsden State High School and Kiri Griffith from Logan Lee High School, and the Scholarship for Early Career Teachers Abby Tamsom from Marsden State High School. Present in the gallery today are representatives of the Fairley Leadership Program in the Goulburn-Murray Valley of Victoria. I had the pleasure of meeting earlier today with the member for Nichols, and we also have Barry Collier OAM, the former member for New South Wales State Electorate of Miranda, and his wife Jeanette. A warm welcome to you all. And I give the call to the honourable member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government cleaning up the mess in the defence budget, and what obstacles does it face doing this?
Call to the order. The Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank the member for his question and thank him also for the hospitality he showed me at Edgeworth on Friday. The Liberals have two great conceits. Their economic management and defence credentials. But the truth, as borne out by the former Liberal government's economic management of defence, is that they are both incompetent and inept. Those opposite engaged in the extraordinary practice of making huge defence announcements carrying massive price tags while completely failing to put in place the necessary funding. The Guided Weapons and Explosive Ordnance Enterprise, with a cost of $35 billion, they allocated just $1 billion. Their announcement to increase Defence Force personnel carrying a budget of $38 billion, they allocated not $1 of new money. For those who've been involved in defence budgeting or have been watching that closely, it has been an open secret that under the Liberals the numbers simply did not add up. And what that meant was that we saw hundreds of public servants working on programs which would never come to pass. And the innate uncertainty under the Liberals of which programs ultimately would survive gave rise to a confusion at a time when, given our strategic circumstances, what the country needed was precise planning activity. Now, the Defence Strategic Review is the single largest retasking of our Defence Force in 36 years, and we are committed to getting the books back in order, and that does mean making difficult decisions, such as reducing the infantry fighting vehicles plan number from 450 down to 129 as just one example. But given that is a difficult decision, the reaction from those opposite has been the predictable reflex of hysteria, as we have watched the Leader of the Opposition ran around the country screaming at the top of his voice that Labor is cutting the defence budget. Misinformation which was repudiated by ABC Fact Check just this month. Now, the truth is that under the Liberals, defence spending was going to go to 2.1% of GDP over the next decade. Under Labor, defence spending will go to 2.3% of GDP over the same period of time. That's almost a 10% difference.
Order.
It's more than what we committed at the last election, and it's certainly a lot more than what those opposite were willing to
Order.
spend on defence.
Give the call to the honourable member for Ryan.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Next week in New York, the UN Secretary-General will host an urgent climate ambition summit with an expectation that developed countries attend with pledges to end support of fossil fuels. Minister, will you or someone from the government attend the summit, and how will you explain your approval of coal and gas projects?
Yeah, I just want to hear from the. Yeah, the question needs to be directed to the relevant minister. So I've checked. I'll just ask the Minister for Climate. Under the standing orders, the question can be directed to the relevant minister, but I'll hear from the Leader of the Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. Just on who the question was directed to in the first place, I don't know if the suggestion was that it was addressed to the wrong minister, but it was about the approval of coal and gas projects, which is the Minister for the Environment's responsibility.
The question was about next week's UN summit and who would be attending that summit. Yes, I know there was another part of the question, but I think anyone would make the assumption that is the part of the question that needs to be addressed. So I'm just going to give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I'm sure we all thank the honourable member for her question. It gives us the opportunity to make clear the Foreign Minister will be representing Australia at the UN Secretary-General's summit. We have been invited as a country with an appropriate policy on climate change. Might not have occurred a few years ago, but it has occurred now that Australia has been invited and will be very well represented by the Minister for Foreign Affairs, who will be making clear this government's policies and approach and the leadership we bring to international forums, like the Prime Minister brought last week to the international forums that we are taking to COP this year in very good company, arguing for strengthening of the world's action on climate change. Australia is back at the table of climate leaders, no longer left out of international summits because our climate policy wasn't good enough to get an invitation.
Give the call to the honourable member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is also to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government working with First Nations communities to improve climate change and energy outcomes, and how will recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through a voice strengthen this work?
Order. The member for Kennedy and the member for Solomon. If they keep that up, they won't be here to hear the answer. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I very much appreciate the member for Solomon's question. And the member for Solomon and the member for Lingiari both know very well that Indigenous people in remote Australia suffer levels of energy insecurity that we would, quite frankly, Mr Speaker, expect to see in the developing world, not a developed country, in 2023. More than 90% of Indigenous Australians who live in remote Australia suffer energy disconnections at some point in the year. And well over two-thirds suffer those disconnections more than 10 times a year. Now, Mr Speaker, we are not talking about disconnections of a couple of hours in many instances, but disconnections in many instances of days at a time, because Indigenous Australians in remote Australia are amongst the very few groups of Australians who are required to pay for their electricity before they use it, not afterwards. Now, let's just think about this for a moment, Mr Speaker. In some of the hottest places on the planet, Australians who are First Nations people are being disconnected from their electricity on many, many occasions. And let's think about the impact of this on disadvantage. We are not only talking about some of the hottest places on the planet, Mr Speaker, but we are talking in many instances about Australians who are suffering multiple health conditions, comorbidities, which require medicine in many instances which should be refrigerated, and they are being disconnected, 91% of them, from their electricity at least once a year. These are instances, Mr Speaker, of great irony, like the community at Punginjera, which I visited, where they told me they'd love to have solar energy. Makes sense in some of the sunniest places on the planet, but it's very hard to make this work with the energy system that they are operating on. Now, Mr Speaker, we have plans and policies to try and improve this situation. We have a First Nations Clean Energy Strategy. We have a First Nations Emissions Reduction Committee. But we have to also be very honest and say, with the very best of intentions, all governments have had good intentions, but so often it has fallen short because we have too often done things to Indigenous communities, not with Indigenous communities. Now, more than 6 years ago, Australia's First Nations communities sent a message to Australians from the heart, asking to be consulted on matters that affect them. And we know that outcomes improve when we talk to people and hear from people about matters that affect them. We have a chance on October 14 to respond to that request with a resounding yes, not by sending messages of fear and doubt, but by having messages of fact and hope, Mr Speaker. That is what we can do as Australia on October the 14th, to say yes to the chance to bring people in the centre of Australia into the centre of this building's conversations more than they have been, more than they ever have been, Mr Speaker. That is what Indigenous people ask us to do. That is what we can say yes to on October 14th.
The minister's time has concluded. Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to move the following motion forthwith.
Order.
That this House expresses its grave concern at this Prime Minister's comprehensive mishandling of the Voice referendum, including a failure to explain to the Australian people how the members of the Voice will be appointed or elected, what the consequences will be for government decision-making processes, and what the scope of issues will be on which the Voice will have the power to make representations. And B, an unwillingness to consult in relation to the words of the constitutional amendment, or to consider limiting the amendment to the issue of constitutional recognition. C, the arrogant assumption that the Australian people will be ready to vote in support of the Voice when they've not been given the details of how it will operate and how it will be structured. And D, the Prime Minister's actions dividing the country in an unprecedented and reckless way.
Is leave granted?
Leave's not granted.
I give the call to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I move that so much of the standing and sessional orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion forthwith. That this House expresses its grave concern at this Prime Minister's comprehensive mishandling of the Voice referendum, including a failure to explain to the Australian people how the members of the Voice will be appointed or elected, what the consequences will be for government decision-making processes, and what the scope of issues will be on which the Voice will have the power to make representations. B, an unwillingness to consult in relation to the words of the constitutional amendment or to consider limiting the amendment to the issue of constitutional recognition. C, the arrogant assumption that the Australian people will be ready to vote in support of the Voice when they've not been given the details of how it will operate and how it will be structured. And D, the Prime Minister's actions dividing the country in an unprecedented and reckless way. Mr Speaker, the reality is that this Prime Minister has misled the Australian public.
Resume your seat. Resume your seat. Yep. Resume your seat. The Leader of the Opposition, you've moved the suspension. I'm going to order. The member for Cooper is warned. The Leader of the Opposition will just resume his seat so I can hear from the Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, I'll require that this debate be continued after the MPI under Standing Order 47E.
Move to the next question. Give the call to the member for Werriwa.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government cheaper medicines policy helping Australians lead healthier lives? What obstacles has the government faced in delivering this cost of living measure?
Order. Order. The Minister for Climate Change. When the House, I don't know what's going on over there, but when the House comes to order, the Treasurer will cease ejecting. I want silence in the House so I can hear from the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the Deputy Government Whip and the member for Werriwa for her question, because she promised her community cheaper medicines, and we're already delivering on that promise. Just last July, Mr Speaker, we capped the amount, slashed the amount that pensioners and concession card holders would pay for all of their medicines needs across a given year by 25% to just $5 per week over any given year. And, Mr Speaker, to the end of June, 450,000 more pensioners and concession card holders had already qualified for free medicines for the remainder of 2023 than had qualified at the same time last year, 450,000. On January 1st, we delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, slashing the maximum payment from $42 a script to just $30, and I can inform the House, Mr Speaker, that in just the first 8 months of that measure, $160 million has been saved. That's $160 million back into the pockets of hard-working Australians during a global cost of living shock. And of course, Mr Speaker, on the 1st of September, almost 4 million Australians qualified for 60-day scripts for around 100 common medicines used to treat a range of ongoing health conditions. 2 scripts for the price of 1, effectively halving the cost of those medicines for almost 4 million Australians, and 2 million more Australians will qualify for 60-day scripts next year, Mr Speaker. Good for the hip pocket and good for their health. And, Mr Speaker, we continue to put more and more medicines onto the PBS. This month we listed 2 new cutting-edge, life-saving medicines used to treat the blood cancers, lymphoma and leukemia, Onureg and Brukinsa. Before this listing, Mr Speaker, patients would have had to pay $100,000 and $150,000 respectively just for 1 course of treatment. But after this listing, around 1,500 patients will be able to access this treatment at just $30 a script. Now, mother of 3, Skye Hollingworth, had recently had intensive chemotherapy for acute myeloid leukemia, or AML. Happily, she's in remission, but unfortunately AML often comes back to bite the patient again. With the listing of Onureg, she now has a much better chance of continuing to live cancer-free. And she said this, Mr Speaker, "It is incredibly important for peace of mind that something is working on my body so I don't need to go through this again." Mr Speaker, cheaper medicines truly does change people's lives.
Yeah. Give the call to the honourable member for McKellar.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is also to the Minister for Health. In the May budget, I welcome the government's announcement of stronger legislation and funding to address the rising rates of vaping, particularly amongst school children and young Australians. Since that announcement, however, a number of convenience stores that sell vapes have opened up in my electorate in McKellar. These stalls are typically located close to busy school bus stops, and they are selling vapes to school-aged children. What is the minister's timeline for shutting down the illegal sale of vapes to children?
The call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for McKellar for her question. She is one of a growing group of health professionals elected to this parliament, really adding value to the debate about the important policy issues around healthcare. And as a very experienced general practitioner, Mr Speaker, she knows a public health menace when she sees one, and that is what this has become. More evidence is released almost every month about the harms being done to our youngest Australians from this product. Only yesterday, a research institute and university from New South Wales released evidence about the second and third-hand harms that are being caused to young Australians from the chemical residues that vapes leave on the surface of clothing and other surfaces as well, very sticky residues that contain very harmful chemicals. And I remind members of this House that vapes contain more than 200 chemicals, some of which are typically used for weed killer, for nail polish remover and other poisonous products like that. Now, this product was sold to global communities, Mr Speaker, as a therapeutic good to help hardened smokers kick the habit. It was not sold as a recreational product, and particularly not sold as a recreational product for the youngest members of global communities, but that is what it has become. That is why these things are marketed with unicorns on them. That's why they're marketed with bubblegum flavour. That's why they're disguised as highlighter pens and USBs so kids can hide them in their pencil cases at school. And as the member said, it is no surprise that these vape stores are being opened right across the country, right next to schools, because that is the target market for this insidious product. Let's be clear, this is a product being shamelessly sold to recruit a new generation of nicotine addicts. And tragically, Mr Speaker, it is working. Under 25s are now the only cohort in the community where smoking rates are actually going up. We know from evidence from the University of Sydney that you are 3 times more likely to take up smoking if you vape. And it is now the #1 behavioural issue in school communities, as the Minister for Education has said time and time again. Now, some people, including some in this parliament, say that it's all gone too far. We should just raise the white flag and just continue the market. Well, that's not the approach of this government. It's not the approach of every state and territory government who have also joined. By the end of this year, I intend to put in place an import control regulation that will make illegal the import of these vapes. To his credit, Greg Hunt tried to do that, but he was rolled by his own coalition party room, and so you've had open borders for all of these years. This public health menace has exploded over the course of the last few years, but this government is absolutely determined to stamp it out.
Call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese Labor government getting on with the job of delivering the infrastructure Australia needs, particularly through working with regional communities?
Order. Order. The member for Riverina. I give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Can I thank the member for Cunningham for the question? She is a very strong advocate for the people of the Illawarra, who of course know firsthand how important it is for the Commonwealth not just to deliver for regional communities, but to actually work with regional communities to ensure that our investments deliver a better quality of life for Australians all across the country. Over the last 18 months, that's exactly what this government's been doing, working for regional communities, but more importantly, working with regional communities. First, we've redesigned regional investment programs to ensure best practice transparency and consistency of process, as well as fairer distribution of funds to ensure people can have confidence in these new programs. And last month, expressions of interest for the $300 million Growing Regions program closed. Communities across the country have now submitted their expressions of interest, which are for the first time being assessed by a multi-party panel, members of the Liberal Party, members of the National Party, independent members and members of the Labor Party undertaking those assessments of the expression of interest, and I want to thank them very much for the work they are about to do. What this program is going to do is deliver its capital works that will improve equity, will support social inclusion, grow local economies and make our regions an even better place to live. At the same time, our new $400 million Regional Precincts and Partnerships program is now open for applications. Unlike traditional grants programs, this program will always be open. It's a program that will bring together governments and communities to deliver regional precincts that are tailored to local needs and have a shared vision for how that precinct connects to the community. We've taken inspiration from places like Muswellbrook, the Upper Hunter Innovation Precinct, and also the terrific precinct in the University of Tasmania, the Inverest campus. And the Housing Support Program, $500 million, a competitive funding program for local and state governments to kick-start housing supply. This new funding will see a significant proportion go to our regions, making sure we're tackling housing shortages and putting down pressure on rents and the cost of living in regional communities. And of course, There are over 300 Commonwealth-funded major transport infrastructure projects currently underway or under construction. Many of them are in the regions, of course, including Coffs Harbour Bypass, the Tanami, Santa Teresa Way and projects up and down the Bruce Highway. Because we are actually building. We're not writing on a press release. We've made, we saw those opposite make an announcement and then not deliver. We're actually getting on the job. We're working hard and working with local communities to deliver the infrastructure they need and deserve.
Call to the Prime Minister.
Speaker, I ask further questions be placed on the notice paper.